Okay, so now that the dust has settled around the Mavic 3 Pro's release, I wanted to weigh in a couple of months later to really emphasize how powerful this camera system has been for me on my day-to-day use of this drone. It's gotten to a point where I've become so reliant on having 3 cameras that I can switch to on the fly at any time that I want to, that I almost feel like I'm at a disadvantage when I use any other drone. Really quickly, I want to give a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, but more from them later. Now, if you look at a majority of the drones that have come out before the Mavic 3 series, like the Mini 3 Pro, the Air 2S, even going back to the Mavic 2 Pro, they all have a single camera system. Of course, the Mavic 3 Pro, being such a new and expensive drone, is going to outclass these other options that I just mentioned, but even if we look across the Mavic 3 lineup at, say, the Mavic 3 Classic, this is a drone that is completely identical to the Mavic 3 Pro in basically every regard. The flight time, the range, the speed, the airframe, literally everything is the same. You even get the same primary camera with a 4/3 sensor that can capture 5.1K video, 4K video at 120 frames per second. It can shoot 20 megapixel photos, and probably my favorite thing about the sensor, the dynamic range. The colors, everything about this camera just makes it so good. The one thing that makes the Mavic 3 Pro so much different though is the 2 extra cameras that come equipped on the drone that have different focal lengths. So with the push of a button, you can switch between the standard 24mm lens, the medium tele 70mm lens, or the third tele lens that lets us zoom all the way in to 166mm, and this is all optical, so you don't lose any quality to a digital zoom as you punch in. This is assuming that you'll keep the drone out of Explorer mode though. You actually have a total zoom range of 28 times, but for the sake of this video, we're going to be looking at the true focal length of each camera. So this right here is what makes the Mavic 3 Pro's camera so powerful, the ability to switch between different lenses, different focal lengths at any point during your flight. Now you might think it was unfair that I compared the Mavic 3 Pro to drones that are less expensive than it, that are of course not even in the same class, but this goes for really any drone that only can carry one camera with one lens. Take the Inspire 3 for example. I've been flying this drone for the past few weeks and I've been absolutely loving everything about it. It's fast, agile, has a nice big controller. The camera produces some of the best aerial imagery that I have ever seen at 8K with colors that pop off of the screen, a dynamic range that doesn't even seem like it should be possible. Here's the thing though, every time I'm flying this near $17,000, $20,000 setup with a full frame camera, I always wish in the back of my head that I could just push a button on the controller and switch between cameras or switch between focal lengths. This beast of a camera does have interchangeable lenses with native 18, 24, 35, and 50mm options, but in order to switch between them, you have to land, turn off the drone, swap the lenses, turn the drone back on, and in that time, you may have lost your window of opportunity to capture what it is that you're shooting. Like take this for example. I was down in Cape May capturing some shots of the sunset when I saw this boat ripping into the inlet. Now at the time, I was far away from it, so I had to get on my horse to catch up, and to help me gain a little bit of room, I punched in to the 3x camera. Not only did this let me cheat a little bit to stay further away from the boat, but stylistically, I love the compression that comes off of this lens, especially when orbiting around this boat that was moving really fast. Now because I had the ability to switch between lenses, I was also able to jump back over to the wide camera at 24mm and get this epic reveal shot as the boat sailed underneath and into the inlet, ultimately revealing the rest of the bay and the sky. If I was instead flying the Inspire 3 at this time for this shot sequence, I wouldn't have been able to make it work the way that I did with the Mavic 3 Pro. Now look, I wouldn't have been able to complain because this camera is amazing. I would have gotten this crisp 8K video as the boat was coming towards me and as it was going towards the inlet, but I wouldn't have been able to make it stylistically look the same. I would have had to use the same lens that was mounted on my camera for both shots. I wouldn't have had time to land my drone, put on a new lens, and then put the drone back in the air to say get a wide angle shot of the boat as it went through the inlet. And that's why the Mavic 3 Pro's camera is so powerful, because you've got the ability to switch lenses on the fly at an immediate notice to really adapt to whatever it is that you're trying to capture. Now before we go any further, I want to give a quick shout out to this video sponsor, Squarespace. Just recently, I completely overhauled my Squarespace site with a brand new template to give it a clean feel. It was difficult to choose a template because of all of the great options that Squarespace offers, but I eventually found one that allowed me to share my images and information the way that I wanted. Redoing my website was seamless as the new Fluid engine made it easy to fully customize every aspect to my liking. I also really enjoyed taking advantage of some of the new sections and tools Squarespace has added, making my website fun to navigate and interactive. For me, studying analytics is such an important part of posting content online, so being able to see a detailed report of what pages are getting the most traction from where allows me to make changes to my site that best suit what the viewer wants to see. Something that I'm really looking forward to taking advantage of is the online store where I'm looking to sell my prints from photos that I've collected on my travels. Squarespace makes it easy and gives you all the tools that you need to create an online digital marketplace. So a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and helping me display my work online for over half a decade. Okay, so the thing to think about with these 3 different lenses is that yes, it gives you the ability to get a closer look at something, but the main reason that you'd want to switch between these lenses is to change the look of your shot, to get a different level of compression. This is what professionals expect from any camera that they purchase. Like, you might just have one camera body, but you've got multiple lenses, maybe 5 or 6 different focal lengths that change the way the images from your camera look, except with the Mavic 3, instead of different lenses, you've just got different cameras or different sensors you can switch between that all have different focal lengths. To best understand the difference, I'll use the William Penn statue here on City Hall in Philadelphia as an example. When we flip through the shots between these cameras, the biggest change is the background. As we compress the image by zooming in, what's in the background comes closer and closer to the subject that you're capturing, changing ultimately how your shot looks. I often show this example of the Salt Lake City skyline. With the 24mm shot, you get this wide angle view of the buildings with the mountains in the distance just barely visible. When I move my drone back and flip over to the medium tele camera, so now we're at 70mm, those mountains appear way closer as the image has been compressed. This here, in my opinion, is a way better shot than what came from the wide angle camera. This, however, does come with its downsides. I mean, trying to cram 3 different lenses, 3 different cameras, 3 different sensors inside of one module is going to have its drawbacks. So for example, between the different sensors, you've got different sizes that produce different colors between the images. So you do have a little bit of color shift. For me, it's not that big of a deal now after having used this drone and having color graded the footage, because I know how to make them match throughout so you get one consistent look. But another thing that I've had to overcome is the softness of the 3x and 7x camera, at least when compared to the main camera. Now in a vacuum, they look plenty sharp, but when you start shooting with the main 4/3 sensor, you realize that the dynamic range and sharpness is just way better coming from, that main sensor, from the larger sensor. Now, I will say you do have an added benefit with the 3x medium tele camera, giving you 48 megapixel images, so you do have a higher resolution photograph that you're capturing, but just know it is a quad Bayer sensor. It's not a true 48 megapixel sensor. So yes, while we do have these drawbacks that come from trying to cram all of these sensors into one camera module, it's not enough to keep me away from using them. I know that I'm going to get a great looking shot regardless, and I love the sequences that I can get by switching between lenses to get different types of shots while my drone is in the air. Like in a real world example, I was capturing some video of a home for sale with the Mavic 3 Pro, and a majority of my shots were with the wide camera. It's the perfect focal length for reveal shots, rising shots, establishing shots, wide shots. Really almost everything was done with that wide camera, but because I had the ability to switch focal lengths, I could get low for this reveal of the home from around this tree. There's even a little bush that's popping up from the bottom in the foreground, further adding to our parallax effect. This mixed in with the other establishing shots allowed me to show the home in different ways, and was all done with the press of a button on my remote to flip amongst the different lenses. Let me share another real world example with you that isn't as glamorous. I do some work for a land developer that was clearing a plot of land for a new commercial building. Now the task was just to kind of capture the current state of the job, to document its current state, which I could have literally used any drone to do. Even a Mini 2 in this case would have handled the job perfectly, as it would have given my client what they wanted: high quality shots of the grounds. This kind of brings us back to what we discussed in the beginning of this video, how all of these drones for the past couple of years have had a single camera system that capture videos and photos at the same focal length. So no matter what drone you use, your shots looked very similar. Sure, the video captured from a Mavic 3 is going to look much different than a video captured from a Mini 2 because you've got a bigger sensor, you've got better dynamic range, you've got better colors, right? You've got an overall improved camera system. But the Mavic 3 Pro is the first drone that can fundamentally change the way that your photos and videos look through different lenses. Now for this job, because I was using the Mavic 3 Pro, I decided to make use of those other 2 lenses to see how I could show what was going on at the job site in a completely different way. I used the wide camera for a lot of my establishing shots, like showing off the whole plot of land from a high vantage point, capturing some of the larger areas of work from an elevated perspective, and focusing in on some of the machines and the current actions they were doing. Here's the thing though, that main camera with the 24mm focal length left these action shots feeling too wide. I feel like I wasn't able to focus on one thing and isolate what was happening without getting too close to what I was capturing. This is when I flipped to the medium tele camera with the 3x zoom or the 70mm focal length, and it completely changed the look of my shots. Now I was able to capture those close-up shots of the guys working and the machines running. Not only could I do this while staying a safe distance away from the equipment as they moved the material around, but I also got some great compression within the shot, bringing the action going on in the background closer to the foreground. Like this shot here of all the machines working in sequence is so pleasing because the entire frame is filled with up-close action. Just to quickly compare apples to apples, here's an orbit shot of one of the raking machines, and while the wide shot gives a sense of speed as I whip low to the ground and around the machine, the 70mm lens compresses the image and isolates our focus directly on what the worker is doing. I couldn't help myself though, and I tried to get some dynamic shots with the main camera by whipping the drone around, getting up close to the action. I feel like I was just asking for a crash to happen with this, but nonetheless, it goes to show how different lenses give you different results. Now we can't forget about the other tele camera, which gives us a 166mm equivalent focal length. I've spoken poorly about this lens just because I felt like on a drone it was too zoomed in or too tight, but I actually found some amazing use cases for it, like focusing directly on the worker as he was operating the machinery. This moment right here was an eye-opener for me, as I finally found, at least for me, what the purpose of this tele lens is, and that is for the times where you want to isolate your subject even further. Totally unrelated, but I also snapped this photo with the tele camera and I was blown away by the clarity of the image. I'm definitely going to have to do some more experimenting with implementing this lens into my everyday workflow. I also have to mention that the hyperlapse game has been changed forever, as you can now use this 3x zoom, the 70mm camera, to capture hyperlapses. So just like when taking photos and videos, it completely changes the way that you look through the camera. The way that you frame your shots is going to be way different. And what's great is you can still make use of all of the same flight modes that you get with the main camera. So you've got free, course lock, point of interest, and waypoints. And for me, just kind of experimenting here in Philadelphia, it's been cool to see the different angles I can get that would just look way too weird if I was using the wide camera. But now with that compression, it allows me to get further outside of the city and really capture some awesome angles. And I can't wait to take this on the road with me this summer and continue to experiment and capture hyperlapses across the entire country. Now moving on, recently in Philadelphia, we had a major incident happen in which an overpass on a major section of I-95 collapsed due to a truck explosion. I've been documenting the work done, and while the wide camera has proven to be a great way to capture the site as a whole, the medium tele and tele cameras have been a great way to get a closer look at what work is being done. From getting shots of the actual workers doing different tasks, to machines moving around site, to general detail shots of specific parts of the demolition and construction, this is a project that I've used the 3x camera the most on since getting this drone. One final example I have to share before this gets too boring is the road construction that's being done on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. They're widening this section of the road here, and what gets to be tricky is the logistics behind navigating such a busy roadway like this with my drone. In a similar vein as the I-95 bridge project, the wide-angle camera is great for capturing major sections of the project, but both of the tele cameras came in to be super helpful when looking at smaller details on bridges, overpasses, and structures that were being constructed. On the subject of compression, it also came to be the most helpful when trying to capture this entire 2.5-mile stretch of road in one single image. When flying at the end of the east section of the roadwork being done, this photo taken from the wide camera makes the project look like it goes on forever. What's happening in the immediate foreground is present, but anything down the road can't be made out. Taking the same shot with the 70mm lens compresses our entire image, thus making the whole project a lot easier to see in one single frame. It brings the background closer, as we've mentioned throughout this video. So as you can tell, I've definitely become accustomed to using the triple camera system here on the Mavic 3 Pro. Whether I'm shooting for fun or whether I'm shooting for work, I'm always switching back and forth between the 1x and 3x camera. The 7x camera doesn't get used as much, but the addition of that new 70mm focal length to me really changes the way that I capture aerial photos and videos. You know, I never thought that drones would go in the same direction as smartphones by adding different cameras at different focal lengths, but I guess it kind of makes sense because when you put a drone in the air, the last thing you want to do is land in order to go and change ND filters, change focal length. So that's why the Mavic 3 Pro all around is so powerful, because you can adjust the aperture on that main camera as your exposure changes throughout your scene, and then you can also switch between lenses to change your focal length. So it really is a dynamic system to work with, and that is what makes it so powerful. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the triple camera system here on the Mavic 3 Pro in the comment section below. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.